Hello, everybody. It's me, Councillor James again, and today I thought I would take us back to the topic of universal credit, which I know I've covered quite regularly on the channel over the past years. Obviously, at the moment, I'm sitting here in sunny Rill in mid-February 2021. So February is already racing to an end. The main concern, of course, for most of us, including myself, on universal credits of having to survive on it, and maybe some of you watching this, is that the £20 per week top up, I suppose we'll call it, that was introduced not long after the first lockdown, official lockdown, back in May last year, might be stopped at some point soon. I've attempted to try and keep up online with what's happening with or going to happen as far as the £20 top up is concerned, whether it is there are plans to stop it or whether it will be extended. If it is going to be extended, till when? Unlikely to be an indefinite increase. So a bit of info. There doesn't seem to be much. I've just checked before turning on my camera now on my phone. I found quite a few reports from the big sort of news outlets, mainstream news outlets, over the part which sort of, I think the latest ones were from end of last month, beginning of this month, which just basically say there's a lot of pressure on the government from some MPs to carry on, at least for this year, with the £20 top up. Now, let's not forget universal credit. What is universal credit? Unfortunately, this is why it's even more relevant than it was. Why the £20 top up's even more important than it was, and it was important anyway before this to increase it, the sort of standard weekly rate. It's important because, of course, right at the beginning of the lockdown, almost a year ago, the figures that came out as far as the rise in unemployment or people unemployed, that came out, I think it was about a month after the lockdown started, showed that within the first 2 or 3 weeks of the lockdown being called, don't forget this is almost a year ago, there was an increase of over 2 million claims for universal credit in the space of about 2 or 3 weeks. Now, again, I've tried to keep up to date and look to see how much worse that's got over the year, and obviously because any government, but particularly this one, doesn't want to give us the plain, light of day figures for how bad it's gotten. The unemployment figures actually really are. It's quite hard to find out how many people accurately have had to start claiming universal credit. They're not really shouting about it for obvious political reasons. But of course, common sense should tell you if there were 2 million plus in the first 2-3 weeks, and then with all the different sorts of little lockdowns really all over the country, after that, over the last summer into winter, and then of course this long extended period of lockdown in England and Wales, and I'm assuming Scotland as well, and Northern Ireland. Obviously, that figure's going to grow probably exponentially, So my guess would be, in reality, maybe 4 million, unemployed really, 3-4 million, around that sort of figure, unemployed and underemployed, to the point where it's a problem, to the point where those people are on the breadline or below the breadline. So that'll be my best guess. Again, they're not going to shout about that. The figures they are going to release are going to be sort of presented, spun in a certain way. But yes, we're now hopefully reaching the beginning of the end of the actual sort of fear of contracting COVID and the new strain of COVID and the worst happening to us, which is fantastic. So we can start to sort of release the brakes and get back to some sort of normalcy as far as daily life is concerned. But of course, the impact on jobs, the impact on income, the impact on social life, people's lives, families' lives, whether people can put food on the table for themselves and their children and their families, keep a roof over their heads, because of course there's vast amounts of private renters all over the country. There's not enough social housing anywhere really in the country, or there wasn't anyway. This is before the COVID crisis hit and the resultant socio-economic fallout, which has already started and will obviously only get worse. And of course, this will particularly affect where those problems were already slow rolling or fast rolling. So places like here where I'm sitting, perhaps places where you're watching this from, the poorest parts, the most deprived parts of the country, of course, will be hit first. The most deprived families and individuals will be hit first and hardest. So, yes, universal credit. If I could wave a magic wand as a councillor, what would I do? How would I revise the system? How would I, what's the word they like to use? How would I, there's one yesterday that I was listening to, they kept using, Matt Hancock's trying to sort of instill yet more privatisation through confusion, really. Consolidation and confusion in the NHS right now, with everything that's going on, because that's what these people do. That's what these people who pretend to be our representatives, who are really in the pay of the rich, the billionaires club, on both sides, not just Conservatives, on the so-called Labour side as well. This is the problem, isn't it? Is that there's just one giant. There is, in reality, just one giant political machinery here that puts up the pretense of being one in government, one in opposition, whatever time that is. But they both believe in the same thing. They both believe in insurance companies, privatisation, paying for better health care, different tiers and levels, for those that can afford this package or that package, just like it is in the US, where it's, of course, even worse for the end users, vast majority of them, because if you can't afford it, you don't get it. we're getting there. Anyway, I'm digressing to to health in the NHS now, which of course is all linked. But anyway, that'll be perhaps next time. The topic for next time. Well, the first thing I'd do, having been subject to not just universal credit, but I've been had to survive on job seekers allowance, which was the previous sort of regime. And unfortunately for me, living where I live, and grown up where I've grown up, in a very deprived seaside town, bit of a double whammy really. I've since school more or less had to survive at some point on all of the different sorts of out of work help safety net that the various different governments over the years have had. So I mean, right from the early Major government through New Labour and sort of the New Deal and Job Club and all that sort of stuff, and then into all the way through that, and then right into the sort of when Cameron sort of took over in 2010, and all those sorts of then slow changes with Duncan Smith put in to arrive here at universal credit, basically. So the worst thing, the most damaging thing for me and others that I've spoken to over the years and helped over the years is the sanctions regime. The sanctions regime, of course, doesn't just affect universal credit claimants. It also affects all those claiming sort of on the out of work or in work part of universal credit. It affects those who are claiming long-term sickness benefits, ESA, Employment Support Allowance, where of course if you're in the work group, not the support group, the work group, where you have to fulfil the same sort of work search commitments that people on universal credit not claiming those benefits against ESA, you have to fulfil the same weekly agreement, basically, i.e. what you'll do to look for work, the length you'll go to, the amount of time you will spend, up to 35 hours a week, I think it is. So basically obeying what you're told to do by your job coach and all this sort of stuff, because the idea is if you're in a work group on employment support allowance, they've assessed that your health condition will get better within 12 months. Often, of course, completely wrong, because of course the assessments famously aren't accurate, aren't fairly carried out. So a lot of people find themselves in the work group that should have been in the support group, where you do not have to carry out the same commitments as someone like me in the universal credit out of work, looking for work group. So I would do away with benefit sanctions. Sanctions basically mean if you have a review, which you have monthly, with your work coach at the job centre, if they feel you've not done enough, if they feel you're not doing enough, if they've told you to apply for a certain job or look at a certain whatever and you haven't done it, and you don't have a good excuse or reason in their opinion, they then will reduce what you're supposed to get for that month coming up, payment basically. They can take parts of it away, take the whole thing away. There are varying levels of sanctions, benefit sanction basically. So what it means, of course, is that people who are relying on it, of course, because it's that or nothing else. There is no other. They don't have savings. They don't have capital, which is why they're applying for universal credit or ESA to survive. It means the safety net, as it is removed from under you. Now, in my opinion, and I think many people's opinions, how any civilised or any government, any society that wants to call itself or think of itself as civilised, that does that, that threatens to do that to people who are already struggling, already going through the stress of having not enough money, not having a job but being underpaid. Well, clearly that how can any system, government, claim that that's acceptable? That would be my opinion. Maybe yours is different. All I can say is that's not how it used to be. For the majority of time, and I've had to, as I say, survive on the very different sorts of help as someone who's looking for work and unemployed at the time. This never used to be the case. This was brought in by the Tory governments, Mr. Cameron's government actually, some time ago, and has become the norm, I suppose. Basically, of course, there were always penalties for people who, the very few people who were actually worked and signed on, because of course that was defrauding. That was defrauding a government department, paying out public money from public funds to help support people who needed it at the time. So there always were penalties, but what's happened is the whole thing has been shifted. The weighting has been shifted. It's been shifted from most people who are here because they have to be here, not because they want to be. And the system's here to help as much as possible. We'll argue about the amounts and how much that helps or not. So people are paid, but anyway, help. And then the weighting for that was sort of shifted right around on its head by the Conservative government of Mr. Cameron, at the behest and with the help of Mr. Duncan Smith, Duncan Smythe, to an opposite, which is that people claiming this are doing it because it's a lifestyle choice. We used to hear it quite a lot. It's a lifestyle choice, not because you have to or need to, but because you want to. These people don't want to work. They want to get money for nothing. They want to, and then of course it was backed up with this sort of nonsense from the Red Tops and the Sun and the Mail, all these sort of stupid, nonsensical, baseless stories about how vast numbers of people have free mansions, have sort of 16 kids and 16 lots of child benefit and all this, are rich, beyond the dreams of avarice because they've got children and they're signing on and we're paying for it and all this. Well, of course, the reality was absolute bloody nonsense. Do you know how many people have 16 kids in the country statistically anyway? Do you know how many people have more than 4 children in the country? That them would be signing on or claiming benefits, whatever that means, because it's a huge range of benefits. And then, of course, they've all got rules attached, So, I've never met anybody, but maybe, I don't know, maybe there were a handful of people in the entire country out of 64 million people who were managing to fiddle it or something, but if they were fiddling it, they would have been found out pretty quickly. If they were on the front page of the Sun or Mail, that means they've been found out. So the system's worked, hasn't it? So, there'll be a pretty hefty penalty to pay financially, or jail time. So it wasn't needed. The switch wasn't needed. It was working fine. Even the Tories admitted at the time that they didn't know what the scale of fraudulent claims were, actually, because it ranged from something like 0.01% to 0.1% of claimants. Nobody knew, but it was tiny. Even within that range, it was a tiny amount. The vast minority of people claiming, because the vast majority of people claiming are doing it because they have to, not because they want to. Who wants people to know that they're having to rely on government assistance to survive? Nobody wants people to know that. Nobody's proud about that or happy about that, So that's what I'd change. I'd get that back to how it was, and a lot less people would suffer. A lot less people would die, because people have been dying. I'm not a great fan of Owen Jones. I think he's rather disingenuous, actually, Owen Jones. But I have to say, one of the things that I do credit Owen Jones for, and you may have seen this, I think it's on YouTube if you want to go and see it again, was not very long after these changes were made and sanctions were brought in, and it was on the subject of the assessments for disability assessments for people claiming ESA. There were a number of stories about people who had been far past fit for work, by some of the private the resourcing companies that were being privately paid to carry out the assessments by medical professionals, by Duncan Smith and that Tory government, which has continued. Past fit to work, which means they put in the work group I'm talking about, having to do the same things, look for work, because they've been deemed fit enough that they will get better within 12 months by these assessors, and then people walking out of those assessments and literally dropping dead the next day. Their health was actually, in reality, was so bad. Past fit one day, dead the next. And there was story after story like this appearing in the press. And all credit to Owen Jones on a Question Time which had Ian Duncan Smith on it. He read out the names of a few of the people this had happened to, been past fit by his resourcing companies that the DWP under his management were paying vast amounts of money in government contracts to assess these people, who were then falling down dead after being past fit for work. And Ian Duncan Smith certainly really did not appreciate that, was not happy about it, because it was one of the few times that's been put out there to the public during a mainstream prime time television show on the BBC. So fair credit to Owen Jones. He has done that. He did do that. Unfortunately, this has been going on and on since then for many, many years, and no one's really doing it. It's being swept under the carpet, blind eyes being turned, as with many things, most things that this criminal, truly bunch of crooks. Don't think of these people as our MPs, Prime Minister, government. Same in the opposition, with so-called opposition, with Labour. Anyway, There's only been a Tory governments for 10 years now, so I can only really talk about Tory governments. But these people are crooks. These people are it's like, think of these people as Al Capone and his and his gang. They've been financially raping this country, the public funds, for 10 years. And if you think they haven't been using the past year, the pandemic, to hand out yet more fat, lucrative, publicly funded contracts to companies owned by their friends and their backers, Tory party backers and donors, same thing, is an excuse to shovel vast amounts of public money into their pockets, private companies' pockets. If you don't think that's been happening, I don't know what you've been paying attention to. Well, over 100,000 extra deaths have occurred over this past year because of COVID and their utter mishandling of it, complete and utter mishandling of it. I mean, incompetence is just, if you think about it and follow it and go back over it, is just something to behold. They have the deaths of over 100,000 on their hands, many of them some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And yet they've used that time to siphon billions of your money, not their money, billions of your money, into the pockets of their mates. Their mates in big business. So, while people like me, perhaps people like you, have been shut in for a year and had our lives, made extremely difficult for a year, even harder than they were before, whether you're on universal credit or not, whether you're working on it or looking for work on it, whether you're disabled on ESA, trying to get ESA, trying to get PIP, with this disgusting assessment regime. Well, that's all been going on. The Conservatives' backers and friends and mates have been making hay with the help of Mr. Sunak, the Chancellor, and Mr. Johnson. They're crooks, the great train robbers, absolute rank outside amateurs compared with these, and I'm going to say it's thieving Tory bastards, murderous thieving Tory bastards. Unfortunately, if we could replace them with Labour tomorrow, I can't see how that would particularly change. This is where we're at now. So anyway, that's half an hour, nearly. So if I could change anything, scrap the sanctions, get rid of the sanctions. It's literally killed who knows how many people. There was a time when death statistics regarding ESA claimants past fit for work had been forced. The government had been forced to publish them. I think this was around 2014-15. Had been forced. By the relevant court to publish them. They spent, I think, a year or more, again, with public funds, appealing, trying to stop and block having to release them. They released them in the most confusing way possible, to make it as unclear as possible as who had died and how and what sort of thing. But they were horrendous death stats. I can't remember the exact numbers, but they were horrendous death stats. But again, almost completely unreported. And that was 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago. So anyway, if you've got bit of a horror story, or you're currently going through the process of trying to apply for ESA or PIP or Universal Credit, if it's your first time in Universal Credit, and you've just got on and you're sort of shocked and don't really know what's going on or understand it, if you're struggling with sanctions yourself, yeah, please comment down below. Let me know what you've been going through, what your circumstances are, how you maybe overcome it or haven't overcome it, and that's it for me. That's it for now. We'll talk about the NHS next time, mate. So take care, stay safe. Don't let the bastards grind you down. That's me out.